So Elon Musk recently put out a post on X, formerly known as Twitter, about antinatalism. Now, he didn't mention antinatalism by name, but it's pretty clear that he was talking about it. And he even put up a screenshot in one of the replies to his post of Les Knight, who's the founder of the voluntary human extinction movement. Now, I'm making this video because I'm an antinatalist, and I do think it would be better for each of our sakes if we'd never come into existence. And this would practically lead to extinction. But I'm not anti-human. Now, I wouldn't necessarily call myself a humanist, but the only reason is because I think humanism unnecessarily restricts the scope of moral consideration to humans, when I think it should be to all sentient beings, because we can all suffer. So if I was to use a term, I would call myself a sentientist rather than a humanist. But the difference there isn't a restriction on what humanism believes, it's an expansion. So we will get on later in the video to a definition of humanism, and I agree with it all. I just expand the scope of moral consideration to all sentient beings. Anyway, so now you know where I'm coming from. Let's look at Elon's post on X and see why I think he embarrassed himself. So here's the post. The real fight is not between right and left, but rather between humanists and extinctionists. So there are three core components to this post that I disagree with. And I think they show a couple of things about Elon's mindset and also how ill-informed he is on this topic, but we will get onto that. So the response I put out to this tweet by Elon is, you're acting like the value of human life and the cessation of the human species are in conflict. Once human life is here, it is obviously of moral value, but bringing that life into the world simply imposes suffering and death on them for pleasures they never existed to want. So let's have a brief overview of the three components, and then I'll go into each of them in detail. So the first one is the framing. I think he frames this in terms of conflict, which I don't think is helpful. The second one is misidentification of fault lines. I think he completely misses the mark at where he places emphasis on the key fault lines in the socio-political landscape. And the third one is a misidentification of conflict. I think he views humanism and extinctionism as being in conflict, whereas I actually don't think they are. So let's go into each of them in detail. So the framing. So I think here Elon is framing this post in an unnecessarily divisive way. He's imposing a conflict framing between two groups where there doesn't necessarily need to be one. The issue of extinctionism is one that people can discuss and come from different viewpoints. Remember, the side that Elon is on, natalists, are the ones in power. It's not like natalists are under the boot heel of antinatalists and have to start some revolution to fight the power. So this inflaming of the issue and trying to push people into camps and cause divisiveness is really not helpful, especially coming from the group who has the dominant level of power and influence in the narratives that inform society. And what's funny is one of his next posts. So here he says, what will it take to beat hate? And the irony is that he was the one in the previous post stoking division. And what does a division and conflict framing often lead to? People getting into camps and hating each other and not talking. Elon's X feed is like a clusterfuck of irony. So the second thing was a misidentification of fault lines. So I think out of the two fault lines, or fights as he puts it, in his post in the socio-political landscape that we live in, is obviously between the left and right. It's not between humanists and extinctionists. The fault line between humanists and extinctionists isn't even notable at this point in time, if it ever will be. There are only a few extinctionists out there that actively advocate for this position, and a handful of popular articles advocating the position. So to say this is a bigger fault line than between left and right, okay buddy, you're a joke. And if anyone actually wants a bigger dose of irony than in the framing, then it's that if anyone causes human extinction, it's going to be natalists, not anti-natalists. All of the potential avenues for human extinction, like AI, nuclear weapons, bioengineered pandemics, that are commonly talked about, are pushed forward by natalists because they make up the vast majority of the population. It's not anti-natalists working on these things. If natalists are actually worried about extinction, then their focus being on anti-natalists is massively misguided. So where does this emphasis on the fault line between extinctionists and humanists come from? Well, to me, it seems like Elon is maybe suffering from just being chronically online. He spends too much time on X and seems to have succumbed to the classic Twitter is not real life syndrome, where people spend way too much time on platforms like X, which used to be Twitter, and they completely miscalculate the magnitude of certain issues and fault lines, because when you're on platforms like Twitter or X, often very small niche issues get a torchlight shone behind them, so they make a massive shadow on the wall. and people are looking at the shadow rather than the actual issue. And the third thing I disagree with in his post is that I don't even think there is an inherent conflict between humanism and extinctionism. There are humanist extinctionists. So let's start by looking at what humanism is. So I went on the website of Humanists UK and looked at the definition they put forward, and they say that there are three core components to humanism in general. The first one is a trust in the scientific method when it comes to understanding the universe. The second one is making ethical decisions based on reason, empathy, and concern for human beings, and they actually include other sentient animals here. So actually by this definition I would be a humanist. And the third one is that even in the absence of religion and an afterlife, that humans can still act to give their lives meaning and seek happiness. So they say there those are the three core pillars. They then go on to actually give a proper definition, which is in that screenshot, so you can go back and look at it. And the only thing I would disagree with in the actual definition they give is that the definition that they say is generally agreed upon is human-centered, whereas I would say it should be centered around sentience, which actually they do refer to in their pillars. Okay, so that's humanism. So what's extinctionism? So I couldn't actually find a dictionary definition of extinctionism or an extinctionist association that provides one. So what I'm going to do is put forward two ideas that seem to be central to the motivations of people who are extinctionists. So the first motivation is that humans are destructive as a species and therefore should voluntarily go extinct. And the second one is that humans themselves are actually harmed by coming into existence because they're sentient and can suffer, and so we should endeavour to not bring sentient beings into existence. Now it seems clear to me that neither of these two motivations actually would conflict with humanism, and if anyone thinks they would, then please leave a comment down below to let me know how. It seems to me that you can use the scientific method to understand the world around you, you can use reason and empathy to care for others, and you can create meaning and happiness in your life, all whilst recognizing that it's better not to force other sentient beings into existence. Now, one key thing to note here, which I don't think Elon understands, is that extinctionists don't necessarily want extinction by any means necessary. So for me, as an example, I want people to have the requisite education and access to technology that will allow them to make safe and informed reproductive decisions, but also to understand in a very comprehensive way the impact and consequences that their decision to create someone will have for that individual. And that needs to be in a much more comprehensive way than is currently present in the majority of people. And the reason I want to make this clarification is because Elon, in one of the replies to his post, says this. And what he's saying here is this guy, Les Knight, wants to genocide humanity. So Les Knight, who founded the voluntary human extinction movement, wants to genocide humanity. Elon Musk clearly doesn't understand what genocide means. And again, this goes back to framing. He is using overly divisive and inflammatory language to whip up division and maybe even hate towards this group. Anyway, so that was Elon's post and why I think it was dumb, ill-informed, and frankly embarrassing from a fully grown man. And what I want to do now is touch on a few of the replies to his post, because I think there are additional points made in there that I want to respond to. So this one by Ashley St. Clair says, once you realise this, you cannot unsee it. The anti-human and anti-natalist agenda is woven into the discourse of nearly every top political issue. So here you have people really focusing on the supposedly anti-human nature of antinatalism. But antinatalism isn't anti-human in terms of believing that humans don't have moral value. In fact, it's the opposite. The reason that people are antinatalists is because they recognise that humans have moral value once they come into existence. That's why they don't want to bring them into existence. And they're talking about antinatalism being an agenda, and you've got to remember that obviously when you don't agree with something, it's an agenda, but when you agree with something, it's just speaking the truth, obviously. And she says how it's in nearly every discourse on top political issues. Is it? Because I'm constantly looking for antinatalist content, and I don't see any of this. Antinatalists are a vanishingly small cohort, so I think she's either completely misunderstanding what antinatalism is, or she's just being massively melodramatic. In this one, K10 says, oddly, the ones wanting to eliminate others don't want to be eliminated themselves. And then Elon replies, yeah, if someone is keen to have fewer humans on Earth, they should start with themselves. And I actually replied to this one. So I said, telling people to kill themselves, which is clearly what you're doing here, is both dumb and irresponsible. I'd expect a more responsible approach to this subject from someone with such a wide reach, embarrassing and harmful. So the reason that I said this is because, think about it, this is one of the richest and most influential people on Earth, or who has ever lived. He's even a cult of personality to many people. Like, certain people hang on his his every word. And he's encouraging people who he disagrees with, who aren't harming anyone, by the way, to kill themselves. This seems like a completely irresponsible use of power and influence. And frankly, it's just childish as well. Like, this is a fully grown man that we are talking about. Anyway, so that is Elon's post. Those are my thoughts about it and some of the replies to the post. Let me know what you thought of what Elon said. Let me know what you thought of my response to him, and I will see you in the next one.